Hi, this is Charlie Mato-Toyela from Blue Bear Flutes, of course bluebearflutes.com, and you can find us seems like all over the web these days on Instagram and Facebook under Blue Bear Arts or Blue Bear Flutes. Or you can look up my name if you can figure out how to spell it. Anyway, just wanted to give you guys a really quick tip on how to clean out the inside of a piece of river cane or bamboo. For me, I even use it to clean out the inside of some of our other flutes after they're created. But as many of you know, the bamboo typically has really close nodes, the links here. And everywhere you see a link on the outside, there is a link identifying it on the inside as well. And that one's a little more solid. You have to drill through it to get it out. And then there's always some misshapen pieces in there and everything. And it really does tear up some of the sound quality of a good flute. So we've had a couple of people ask, and certainly we want to make sure that you know how to do some of these things. This is probably one of the most useful techniques that I have ever done with making flutes, as far as cleaning them out and making them play really well for bamboo flutes or river cane flutes, or even some of our wooden flutes. This particular wooden flute has a knot hole, and the knot itself was, for whatever reason, decided to jump out of the wood. And a few minutes ago I was sanding the inside of it out with the same technique, trying to clean it up and smooth it out, and so it's turned out to be a really great flute. But what I want to show you how to do is how to clean one out yourself. Now, this is the setup that we use. Really simple stuff. What does I always say? This ain't rocket science. Anyway, I've got a piece of sandpaper on the end of a dowel, and then I put it inside of the piece of river cane and sand it out just like that. Now, there's a number of ways you can do this, but the way that I do it seems to be a pretty effective one. And I'm going to show you step by step how to make one of those yourself. It's really easy to do, and like I say, I think it'll be something that we can accomplish here in just a moment. So I like to cut this dowel probably about 2 feet long. I mean, most of the flutes that we make don't have an inside diameter bigger than 2 feet. This particular dowel is made out of softwood. I recommend using an oak dowel. The oak dowels will last longer. Even if you're only using it one time, you'll be a lot happier with what it'll do for you. So after cutting it about 2 feet, then we want to put a split inside of it, just big enough that we can hold some sandpaper. And that's easy to do with a scroll saw. If you don't have a scroll saw or a bandsaw or a table saw that you can do this with, a hacksaw works wonders. As a matter of fact, the hacksaw does a much better job than this one does, but it just takes longer, so that's why I like to use the scroll saw. One thing that you want to consider too is the thickness of the cut that you put in there. Now, this has to do with what size sandpaper you're going to use, and I'll show you about how to hook that up in just a minute. But what I'm going to be using is a very thick piece of cloth, very coarse sandpaper. So I'm going to go back and make another splice beside this one, and hopefully clean it out enough that we can use it for that sandpaper. Okay, and so we've got a nice size slit in there. It's not perfectly even, but that's not a problem. As a matter of fact, in some cases that helps make it better. The last thing we need to do is to make the size of this fit my drill. So let's take it over to the sander real quick. So what we've got here is basically a dowel with a slit in the end of it and with a reduced size on the bottom here so that it'll fit inside of my little handheld drill. And let's see if it'll go. Okay, how about that? I'm pretty good. But that makes a dowel on the end of a drill, which is kind of what we're aiming for. The other thing we need is a sandpaper. Now, in the shop here, we have lots of 4x36 sanding belts. As a matter of fact, when it was winter time, we were burning these things for firewood. But there's a lot of variation that you can do on this. Honestly, a piece of regular hand sandpaper like this, there are some flute sizes that we use this on, and with even a smaller dowel. So this is a good way to make a sanding pad on the end of this thing too. Like I say, I like to use the used sanding belts because, for one thing, I pay so much for them. I like to see that they get used. But this one here, like I say, it's beyond useful anymore on the sander. And what I'm doing is using an old piece or old pair of scissors on this piece of sandpaper. And this pair of scissors here, they've been in the shop forever. We only use them to cut sandpaper with. There's an old wives' tale about cutting sandpaper, sharpening scissors. No, that doesn't work. At least it hasn't worked in my experience. And these things here are really incredibly dull, and you can't cover paper with them so much as anything else. But anyway, we use them for cutting sandpaper, and they work pretty good. Once in a while, I'll have to sharpen them, but usually sharpening them only lasts for a day or so, and then they go dull again. So I've cut the sandpaper, I've folded it in half, and then I cut it so that it has like a slant up here. It's like a trapezoid. And the reason I do that is so that the top of it's smaller than the bottom, and this piece goes into the flute easier than it would the other way. It's not completely necessary, but it works well for me. And then it's a matter of fitting it on here. So when you're making your own, you can even kind of sand it out a little bit to make it fit. But when you're making your own, you need to consider what size sandpaper you're going to be using so that you have a hole in there, a gouge big enough to support it. And then you also need to consider what grade of sandpaper. Like in my case, this is some very coarse sandpaper, and it's also very stiff, as you see me bending it here, getting it prepared to use. The more stiff the sandpaper is and the more coarse it is, the more friction it can produce, and it's very likely that in the flute, this piece here may break off. That's why I recommend using a hardwood dowel instead of the softwood, which it's fine to cut on and makes our video a lot quicker. However, for using it inside of a flute, it might get one or two uses, and then you're probably going to have to fish the piece of sandpaper out of the inside of your bamboo or river cane. What I've done these days, because we do this so often, I have the size on the bottom of this perfectly fit to my sandpaper, and then I've also put a nut driver on the end of it here. This I found to be very useful when we weren't making just 20 flutes a week. When we started making a lot of flutes, I noticed that the end of my stick would wear out because each time the drill grabs it, the dogs inside of the drill will tear it up and chew it up. This one doesn't have that problem. Once in a while it may fall off and I have to glue it back on, but I actually heated this up with a torch and pushed it in place, and it stayed there for a year or two before it fell out the first time. So that's really, for me, that's the way to go. And like I say, oak dowel, definitely much better than one of the softer wood ones, a pine or a fir dowel. They won't last very long. Fir, of course, lasts even less time. But there is one thing I want to make you aware of, and Jesse and I were just talking about it because it's something that happens to us once in a while, is that when you're sanding inside of this flute, like this, if you stop the drill while the sandpaper's up in there, and then you pull the drill out, there's a good chance that the sandpaper is going to stay stuck up in there. And then it's about the next hour or two trying to fish it out with either a coat hanger bent in the shape of like a fish hook, or trying to fit this dowel back onto it hard enough that you can turn it and get it out. So when you sand it, you want to have it basically in one fluid motion. Sand it with the drill moving as you go up, and keep the trigger pushed and moving as you go back down. That way, the sandpaper stays stuck on the end of your dowel. That really helps a lot. If something happens that it falls off or comes out, we have these giant tweezers, these giant forceps in the shop that we use for this and a couple of other things. We make some flute bags, and they're really good for fishing cords through a tube. But you can stick these up in there and bring your sandpaper out up to that depth. So just remember, don't get it stuck any further. But more than likely, you won't experience that, as long as when you go in, it's moving, and leave it spinning as you bring it back out. When you do that, it's usually pretty good. This is especially handy, this technique of using the sanding rod, whenever you have a bamboo with these links we were discussing. So let's say you drill the links out or knock them out or whatever you do to get those out, then you can devise a sanding rod and a piece of sandpaper, a size that's adequate for inside of here, and you can go and clean it out. You look and find out that there may be some ridges, then you may need to change your sandpaper and go back and do it again. And after a few minutes, you've got a very slick, smooth tube inside of there that is unlike the design of the bamboo as it grows. It's the way that you make a really wonderful flute out of it. So that's really about it. Like I say, the only other thing, I think a trick that I might want to show you is that when we start this so that it fits inside of the flute, I've already bent it into shape. You see me doing that, and you see me sanding it in my hand here. I'm not sanding it very fast. I don't recommend doing any of this, by the way. This is all very dangerous. So if you do it of your own free will. You can start the sandpaper slowly in here, and I use my fingers to actually push it into place. Now, there's been times that the sandpaper was so large, going to a large enough flute, that I had to bend it and push it inside of there, and this is troublesome and tiring, and when you're doing 1,000 flutes, it's not as quick either. But anyway, that's about it. I hope that this video has helped you all very much. It's a sanding rod. You can use it for a number of other things, of course, but for us, the flute is really the whole reason that I make these. I think I've probably used it one other time to hone out the inside of a tube for somebody. One thing that I should mention you don't want to do is to reverse the direction of your sandpaper while it's inside of the flute. This actually causes a problem and will almost always break the end of your dowel off. And if you see me doing it here in the shop at any point in our videos or what have you, you'll notice that I may be sanding one way and I could be sanding the other way, but I don't do them both at the same time. So in other words, you want to sand in the same direction while the sandpaper is inside of the piece of river cane or bamboo, and wait until you stop and take it out to turn it the other direction. And that really, I think, will help out a lot too. But otherwise, I hope this has helped you. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, you're always welcome to post them here on YouTube. You can also send us a message on our website. If you go down to the bottom of the website, there's a contact form. And of course, always, our Facebook page is a good way to contact us as well. Now, if you do post a message on YouTube, I only ask that you make it a positive one and a kind one for other people who, look on the internet. So basically keeping it G-rated if you can. There's some really funny comments that people put on there, and I love those to death. And some really serious ones that are very nice and wonderful and heartfelt. And some of them are just a little bit on the weird side. But no matter what you do, I hope you guys take care. Thanks so much for watching. And once again, this is Charlie Mato-Toyela of Blue Bear Flutes signing out. Happy flute making.